ABC Listen. Podcasts, radio, news, music and more.
Hello, Richard Fidler here. This special episode is all about food. It's a selection of stories from some of the many cooks and chefs to grace this program over the last 20 years. First up, it's Gary and George. When they spoke with me in 2009, these two men had just appeared on Australian television in the very first season of a little show called MasterChef. Gary Mehigan and George Columbaris were close friends who'd been working together as chefs for a long time. If they weren't yet household names, they were about to be. And back then, it seemed natural for them to be interviewed together.
Gary, tell me about your grandfather and why he was an important figure in your life and what you do now.
We came from a place called Niland, which is a suburb really of Portsmouth or Chichester. It's right on the south coast. It was a lovely place to grow up on. And I think I never obviously paid attention enough, or maybe just realised the importance of what he was teaching me or the fun that we had
and what was he teaching
until
you
later. Well, I mean, silly things like in his retirement, I mean, you know, he had a beautiful garden. And when we talk about English country garden, my mum and dad have a garden like this. You know, it's full of, I've just been there, it's full of plums and pears and hazelnuts and apples, and because things grow well there, it rains a lot, you know, let's be honest. And he had exactly that. You know, I remember the big cooking apple tree, and you don't see cooking apples anymore, but they're big, gnarly, sour things. So when you pull one off a tree when you're a kid and you stick it in your mouth, it's it's astringent and revolting. But cover it in copious amounts of sugar and bake it into a pie, and that is the best apple pie you ever have in your life. Things like little prickly greengages, which are like a little green fruit, rhubarb, string beans, all these sort of things that he grew. As a kid, that's not really very interesting. What was more interesting is he had a fish pond with a big goldfish in there called guzzlegut. So we used to chop up worms and feed it to him. But as I got older, I realised that he was baking bread and, you know, showing me little things like how to chop an onion, or that he would, you know, when he was looking after us, we'd go back to Mum and say, I ate cabbage. And she'd cook cabbage, and of course we hated it because Mum would boil it and Granddad would shred it finely, you know, saute it in a little bit of butter and garlic and bacon. And of course it was the best best cabbage you've ever had. And Mum would go nuts. Why don't you eat my cabbage? And I actually asked my mum later on when I became a chef, I go, because my mum's quite a plain cook. She's a good cook, but she's a plain cook. Everything's fresh, but she's very plain. I mean, in all honesty, her curry will taste exactly the same as her stew. You know, she's so frugal with the curry powder because she doesn't want it too spicy. And I said, how come you learned to cook off Granddad? She said, I learned to cook off your grandmother because, you know, men were at work, and when they came home, their wives cooked for them, you know, a different era. And he never cooked at home, and he was always at work. He had a big block of couverture in the cupboard, and couverture is proper chocolate, not like, you know, not a cooking chocolate. And when I say a big block, it was the size of that book, you know, and it was thicker, probably double the thickness. And it was impossible to chop anything off, you know. I mean, and we found it. It was wrapped in wax paper, which is crinkly. And, you know, that's before the days of cling film. And my sister and I found this block of chocolate. And, of course, we couldn't break it. We couldn't get the chocolate off the block in any other way other than to, like, gnaw into it, like, so it looked like rats. You know, we probably would have been about, you know, I would have been about 9 and she would have been about 7. And we thought, you know, that he would never find out.
Right.
But obviously every time
these little teeth marks.
The teeth marks in the chocolate, you know, and then wrap it back up and put it in exactly the same place. And we were really careful. And obviously over a period of time it got smaller and smaller. And we thought, I suppose as kids, that, you know, he must be using it. And then later on we found out that block of chocolate was just for us. You know, he planted that because he knew in an extravagant kind of way that that would be the most special thing about going round to his house. So I hit about 13 or 14 and thought, this is pretty good. Dad went to work with a cheese sandwich and a flask of coffee every day as an engineer and thought nothing more of food and, you know, than fuel. And Granddad was a happy-go-lucky, vibrant individual who was cooking and gardening and making stuff that was, you could eat it and it was good. As far as I was concerned, Dad was making, I don't know, bits for aircraft. And strangely, my ambitions changed, and I just like the idea of it. And he was very sensible. You know, go and have a go at it because it's a tough business. So I got a job at a local hotel and aspired to be, you know, like the dodgy chef that I know he was now when I look back at that little hotel.
What got you moving so quickly up that ladder, Gary?
I think it's funny. I went to work at the Connell, which was one of the best. Good food used to be in hotels. When I was in London, good food was in hotels. There was a change that swept through probably, in the mid-90s, where hotels were cutting back, and I don't know what the trigger was, but good food switched into restaurants. People like Marco Pierre White, Alistair Little, Gordon Ramsay started to, push themselves forward. But I got a job at the Connaught Hotel, and I remember walking in on my first day, and I'd been at college for 3 years studying professional cookery, and let's be honest, it was a bit of a gas, there were lots of girls, and it wasn't particularly hard work. I used to work on the weekend, and I was flush with money because, not many people working, full shifts on the weekend and earning cash. And I went to work, and it was like a building site with guys, and I equate it to that. It was like a building site with guys dressed in whites. Very aggressive, very hierarchical, 55 blokes on various shifts, one token girl in the pastry. And it was rough and ready, it really was. But the whole focus was earn the right to a recipe, earn the right to cook that recipe. So you started right at the bottom. And it was busy. It was frenetic. It was the heat from the stoves was brutal. It was down in the basement of the hotel. I think the hotel was built in the late 1800s, and it was just a hell of an experience. And I remember my father-in-law saying he remembers when I got onto the butchery, which would have been a year into it, and I just met my wife. We were about 19, I think, 20. And he said, you were working 16 hours a day. And he said he remembers my hands, and they were puffy and swollen because when you used to cut yourself, and you'd cut yourself, when you say cut, like little nicks, and they would get infected because you were so busy, you don't worry about Band-Aids. Once the blood stopped, you just crack on. And you're dealing with things like game, that is, it's not like pulling something out of a bag that's hygienic. I mean, we're talking about wiping down the game as it ages, little game birds like grouse and sarcelle and wild duck and snipe and things like this. Incredible experience. And it pushed me right to the edge of my ability, and it pushed me to the edge of my my sanity, I think. And I got to this point, I remember, where I'd almost collapsed in a heap. I was working 16 hours a day, and I was struggling to stay on top of things. And we used to get a delivery twice a week of Welsh lamb. I think about 14 carcasses would come in, and they'd come in twice a week, and I had to break them down. So you do the big jobs first in the morning, and then as you tired, they became smaller jobs. So come in the morning, lamb would arrive, break them down into legs, shoulders, chops, chumps, racks, saddles. As the day went on, that's interspersed with other jobs that had to be done. But then you start breaking them down. So you'd bone the saddles, you'd stuff the saddles, and it was a massive job. And I remember if you hadn't started that by 7 o'clock in the morning, you were behind. And I remember by 3 o'clock in the afternoon, I hadn't started that breaking down. And I remember at 11 o'clock collapsing in a heap, sitting down with my head in my hands, and one of the sous chefs at the time came up, whacked me on the shoulder. And this was a very, very selfish environment. Did the first, and I remember it to this day, first very genuine thing, tapped me on the shoulder and said, go home. You're no good to anybody. You need to just go home, get some sleep. And I came back in the morning, and it was all done. He just stood there and did it all. It was like that. It was like a moment where I just went, and he said, you know what? When it gets out of control, just ask for help. And it was just, and my father-in-law said, why did you keep going? Can't answer it.
Comfort food, George. What's your idea of comfort food when you've got a cold or you're sad or you're a bit blue or it's been raining for a week? What's your idea of comfort food?
Oh, look, most definitely my mum's egg and lemon soup. It's a really tasty chicken broth made with whole chicken, chicken carcasses, whatever you can get your mitts on. No stock cubes, none of that stuff, none of that rubbish. Made very simply. As chefs we talk about mirepoix and bouquet garni and all these very fancy technique, which is, what I believe in and I practice. But, mum just whacks the chicken in a pot, covers it with water, brings it up to the boil, adds a handful of salt and skims any of the scum off the top and just lets it tick away. Takes the chicken out, picks off all the meat, and then literally buzzes up some whole eggs, some lemon juice, and boils some rice and then just buzzes that through the soup. And you sit there and you eat that and you go, oh, wow. And I've had plenty of times my chefs try and make it and they curdle the eggs. We talk about molecular gastronomy. That is, it's understanding temperature. And here we are. This is a woman that's, got no formal training. She wouldn't have a clue about temperatures, but she knows that she's got to pull it off there, and she uses her special ladle for that to ladle it in and, froth it up. And it's just flavoursome and beautiful.
Yeah, my wife makes that, and it's a beautiful dish. Yeah. It's got the rice in it, and I suppose it's got to have some carbs in it, doesn't it? Comfort food.
That's one of my favourite. I mean, in our house, we have egg and lemon soup, and the only reason I do it is because of George. Because my wife said, can we do George's egg and lemon soup? And what a great thing to do. We've got a chicken and you want a light dinner, and you feel healthy afterwards, don't you?
That's exactly sensational. There's often chicken soup at the root of Greek comfort food, Chinese comfort food, Jewish comfort food.
Everything. I think and that for me is really, I think, what's beautiful about food. It's so different throughout cultures, religions, countries, all that. But at the end of the day, it's a common language.
Yeah, at its heart, it's the same all over the world.
It's like music, isn't it?
Yeah.
You can understand it and enjoy it everywhere. If you're in your mind sitting down to a great big family, that kind of Sunday feast, and there's wine and there's extended family around the table, what's on that table when you have that picture in your head?
Well, it's funny, but, portions are something that my family don't understand, especially my mother. So if she makes something, she makes it to cover the plate. It's not and there's no thought of, is there 2 people coming or 20 people coming? And as our family's growing, my brother and sister both have now kids, and it becomes more about them, those family gatherings. And that's really beautiful for them to sit around. And I don't think they get it yet, all the food that mum puts around the table. But I get it now in my age, in my 30s, because I think I was complacent back then, or I didn't want a bar of it because it was not cool or it wasn't, hip. But it's a lovely feast, and it's just food, and the routine of it. Also, Dad's at the top of the table, and the lunch ends with him grabbing the salad bowl and dunking his bread into the leftover oils and vinegars on the bottom of the bowl, and that's what he does.
That's
the best bit.
Yeah.
And maybe one day I'll get the privilege to take over that.
I also love the fact that you'll see George's mum will come in and bring treats for the chefs, and that always makes me laugh.
That's nice.
That makes me laugh, because I've never worked in a kitchen where the mother of the owner brings in treats for the chefs.
Like what treats? What do we do? Like Greek cakes, you mean?
Yeah. I mean, gurabier, which are little sort of snow biscuits, a buttery.
The ones you nearly choke on when they've got so much sugar on them, and you breathe in and
as they're going down, you inhale it. I don't know. It's funny. She feels like she can tell the chefs what to do, and they love it. I know Travis, my chef, he'll go and spend 3 hours with her at home. He spends more time with my mother than I do with my mother, learning about stuff. And he'll come to me and I'll go, "Where did you get that idea from? That's brilliant." He goes, "George, it's your mum." And I'm like, "What?" And I think that's
why though, don't you? It's because as professionals, you see, we all get on top of ourselves. It's all about feeding the numbers and getting ahead and preparing. It's all what they call mise en place. Getting all of your stuff on the scene. And the best cooking, of course, is not pre-prepared in that way. The best cooking is, if you make a cake, you make it, you take it out of the oven, it just cools enough for you to get your teeth into it, and you're off. And that is the best cake you'll ever eat. And that's why when you go to a bakery, especially when they pop them in a refrigerated counter or whatever, as soon as it takes the chill, if it ever touches the fridge, food changes. Yeah. And I think in professional environments, everything touches the fridge. You've got to be very careful. You've got to be very organised. And it's really difficult to cook in the moment and instantaneously, isn't it? And that's why whenever, for example, when your mum, bakes biscuits, and if I'm lucky enough to get them, they're just the best biscuits you've ever had.
Kanowski here. Next, Hedi McKinnon. If, like me, you only know Hedi's name from her cookbooks, you might not have guessed at her Chinese heritage. But Hedi grew up in suburban Sydney in a traditional Cantonese household. Embedded in her earliest memories is her mother's orientation toward growing, making and sharing food.
The smells from her kitchen would always waft up the stairs. And I would wake up to things like the smell of fried rice, the smell of Chinese shiitake mushrooms that had been made in a broth because she'd be making macaroni soup for breakfast. But my favourite memories are always on the Lunar New Year or a celebration day, because I would wake up to the smell of oil, and I knew she'd be making something called gin doi. It's something that is only really made during either the Lunar New Year or a celebration, and it's filled with either she makes a savoury version. So she'd have that, and also a sweet version filled with red bean paste, and another version with peanuts and coconut. And she'd always have, like what we call lo hon jai, which is like a Buddhist feast. So my mum was always vegetarian during the Lunar New Year. So she would have that already on the stove, and I would dig through that. I don't really remember her outside of the kitchen. I would wake up to her already, preparing several meals for her 3 children. The times we were home, when we weren't at school, I remember her like crouched in her kitchen on the floor on, a brightly coloured plastic stool. She would have a big stainless steel bowl in front of her with her fish paste, which she would pound and pound and pound, and she would beating the seafood mixture to get it to the right consistency. Her fish cakes, there were many things my mum would say she's legendary for in terms of Chinese cooking, but her fish cakes was one that she would compare to her friends and say, look, mine is not mushy, mine is not hard, mine is just the perfect elasticity, and that's what the pounding would be. So she was just always doing something to do with food, like preparing food for the next day, topping and tailing beans, making things to put in the freezer. I mean, my mother had 3 freezers.
3 freezers? What? How many kids?
Just 3 of us.
You each had an allocated freezer. Why did she need 3 freezers?
She's always preparing food. So she could just pull out and make prawns for dinner, because she would have bought prawns from the market, deveined them, got them ready, and then froze them fresh. Whatever she wanted to make, she didn't have to go to the store. I'm the type of person that runs to the store every day. She had it all in her freezer. I remember the first time she left, she went overseas, I think, on a holiday, and it was something for 2 weeks, and she froze all the meals for my brother, who was an adult by that stage. But she had, you could freeze fried rice. Who knew you could freeze fried rice? But she'd have all the meals frozen, So she's a big believer in the freezer. People often say to me, I love how you're not snobby about food. You're okay with using frozen peas. And I'm like, this is the cornerstone of family cooking. We can't all just have fresh peas from the farm. Normal families have to eat, sometimes it's okay to eat frozen food. And as I get older and as I progress more in my food career, I see how those influences are coming back to me. I ended up working in PR in the UK, in London, in my kind of late 20s. And that was a bit of an ab-fab life, I have to say. I worked in a fashion and beauty agency, and we did a lot of fashion shows. And I did that for about 4 years.
And what kind of role did food and cooking have in your life in those years?
I had the relationship of wanting to eat out all the time and wanting to eat at fine dining. That was the phase, you go through that fine dining phase. But it was a very hands-off approach. I didn't cook that much then because my husband and I didn't have children and we were getting home from work super late. So it was a very different relationship to food. But incidentally, the time I lived in London was really the first time that I started to cook Asian food, Chinese food. And the Chinese foods from my childhood, because my mother actually came over and visited me, and we went shopping together at a local Thai/Asian supermarket. And we went back to my house and she actually taught me how to make glutinous rice wrapped in a banana leaf or lotus leaf. It was a big leaf. So that was really the first time I'd ever cooked glutinous rice. And certainly, doing the whole wrapping and the steaming. So that was a dish that we ate often on Friday nights. And it had, some savory, it had mushrooms and had some dried pork and potatoes. She always had potatoes in the glutinous rice. So that was a dish from my childhood that she taught me to cook. And I still think of that dish a lot. And I still make that dish a lot because before that, I never thought I could cook Chinese food. I felt like it was so intimidating to cook the food that my mother cooked because she did it so well. And I would just be like an imposter. Like, who am I to try and cook these dishes? But because I was living in London and she wasn't around all the time, for me, cooking those meals became almost like a lifeline back to my childhood. Like, you know, I felt this nostalgia for the first time, you know, living away from home. So I had my first child, my daughter Scout, in London, and almost the moment after she was born, I knew I didn't want to go back to doing my old job of PR. I was going to hang my champagne glasses up. But, you know, I really just wanted to leave so much, and I needed to get back to Sydney, and I needed to be with my mum. And I don't really understand what that was. Perhaps I felt like I would be a better mother if I was closer to her.
And once you came back, Hedi, did she get involved in terms of food with your kids?
Yes. She started bringing all her foods in, and particularly for the boys, you know, when they were born, one of their first foods was juk, which is, you know, congee, but it's a particular type of juk. It's called juk jay, which translates to like little congee. So it's made in a slightly different way. It's rice with water, but it's steamed. So it's very thick. So if you can imagine, it's easier for a baby's first food. So she would make that. So for the boys, this was really the first food that they ate, was this congee with chicken pieces in it, like shredded chicken. And I really didn't think about it. You know, people have often asked me, you didn't think of raising your kids vegetarian? Because I've been vegetarian since I was like an 18. And I didn't even think about it once. I was like, my mum's here. She's taking control. She knows all the things to feed them, and I'm just going to go with it.
Did the education go two ways? I mean, by that stage, you were an adult, you'd lived away. Did you start introducing new flavours, new foods to her as well?
I only did that when I started cooking for my salad business, Arthur Street Kitchen. And that was really the turning point for me and for her, really. I started this business kind of on a whim. As I said, I've been a vegetarian a long time, and I just wanted to do something to give back to my community. That's in my head what it was. And my mother, when she heard that I was doing this thing, first of all, she thought I was crazy.
Well, what was your idea? What did you tell her you were planning to do?
I said I was going to make salads and deliver them to the neighborhood. And I think to this day, she thinks I was crazy. Like, this is so stupid. Like, why would you do this? You know, like,
what, she didn't think there'd be interest in the public, or what did she think was crazy about it?
Why would you want to do this when you could go work in an office?
Mm-hmm.
But the thing about my mother is we're the same person in many respects. She's creative also, but she was never given the opportunity to, you know, live out those creative genes that she has. And she's often said that to me before. If I was born in Australia, I would have been an interior designer. You know, she actually has thought about this. So I think that when I started my own business and doing, you know, cooking salads, there was a part of her that was kind of fascinated. There was always, you know, there's this Asian mother, you know, there's a lot of jesting between us. So she'd say it's silly and I'll say, oh, what would you know? You know, so there's a lot of that kind of banter between us, but there was interest. So I delivered salads on a Thursday and a Friday. So she would come over both those days on the pretense that she was going to look after Huck for me because he was still at home. But along with looking after Huck and playing with him and bringing him food, and also folding my laundry, she was also kind of inserted herself in the kitchen as my sous chef. But it was always, you know, like, it was kind of funny in a way. All right, so she's part of the business.
And Hedi, I mean, it's this idea of you delivering salads on your bicycle. It sounds quite beautiful and quite whimsical. What kind of relationships did you build up with your clients over that time? Did you get to know people?
Oh, it was just the most magical time. I never expected it to turn out the way it did. All I wanted to do was to feed people. because I discovered, how fun it was to cook and how fun it was to see other people's reaction. But very quickly, when I started feeding people, and that simple exchange of the salad box became like, these people became like part of my family. The neighborhood felt like my dining room. The whole neighborhood felt like my dining room. And it was such joy.
Podcast, broadcast, and online. This is Conversations on ABC Radio. Subscribe to the Conversations podcast. To find out more, just head to abc.net.au/conversations.
Some stories now from chef Josh Niland. Josh has a long list of accomplishments for a relatively young bloke. This is due in part to a terrible childhood illness that led him to his vocation at a very young age. But Josh's approach to seafood, how it's prepared, cooked and eaten, is a very long way from the fish of his childhood in Maitland.
Did you go fishing a lot when you were a kid?
Well, I think Mum specifically used it as a tool to get us out of the house. I think when we started to run up the walls and get a bit restless, she'd take us down to the Hunter River in Maitland and we'd go fishing. And I suppose the interesting thing was looking at the way Mum would make the bait. She would take flour, Vegemite, and some water, and push it into this damper, and we'd go down to the Hunter River with a bucket and a hand line, and she'd teach us how to bait the hook with this sticky dough, and then do a bit of a lasso technique, and you'd have to avoid, getting the line caught in the tree that hung over the river. And if you got the line in the water, then you'd be targeting whiting and flathead, but often catch turtles and eels and some boots. So, yeah.
I have to ask, damper with Vegemite in it works as fish bait?
Surprisingly, we caught a few flathead with it, but yeah, I think the eels enjoyed eating that a bit more. So,
so once you'd caught the flathead...
Yeah.
How would she cook it?
Well, the practice was, and I suppose fascinating and also slightly scary at a young age to watch Mum catch this fish. You'd come up, she'd give it a good whack over the head with a thong or something that was close by, pop it in a bucket and take it home. And the idea was that you get the best knife out of the drawer, you'd go out to the garden tap, you'd give it a good scale, let it all go outside, and then start the tap running. And, you'd strip the organs out under the running water, and she'd push it into the garden and tell us it was good fertilizer, and then go ahead, dust it in way too much flour, and then pop it in a fry pan and make it brown. And that was, I suppose, the fresh fish experience of Maitland, and what it felt like to eat something that was incredibly fresh. Yes, it was overcooked, but you can remember how sweet it was, and just genuinely it was a nice experience, even if you had to pull the bones out of your teeth and watch your sister choke on a fish bone from time to time. But it was nice. But besides that, it was tinned tuna, tinned salmon, and the occasional white anchovy. That was fish to me.
But tell me how a couple of experiences in this job upended all your ideas about what fish was, how it should be kept, presented and served and cooked and eaten.
Yeah. So one night during the clean down at Fish Face, which would extend itself into the early hours of the morning, Stephen was making his brulees that he became very famous for making, and this was at 1 a.m. And in a fairly lucid state that he doesn't remember really talking to me much about it at the time, I was expressing to Steve my difficulties towards selecting garnishes that were coherent with the fish species that was in front of me. And I said, how do you pair up things properly so that you do justice to how good these fish are? And he goes, well, why don't you think of fish more as meat? And I'm like, what do you mean? And he goes, well, tuna kind of looks like a cow, right? You could cook it like beef. You know how to cook beef, don't you? And then from there, he rattled off swordfish as a pig. He rattled off mahi-mahi like, a roast piece of lamb. He said, pigeon was almost like a mackerel or a bonito. And so, there's no cognitive ability at that age or time where you can just piece all that together into this magical, plan. But it was an eye-opening thing that he said, and I wrote it all down in my book. And then the second occasion was the same kind of thing. I was cleaning down at the end of the night. I foolishly made the mistake of not packing my fish away. And so there was 15 portions of fish on a tray that were left exposed to the fan in the fridge. And I got a mouthful the next morning saying, why didn't you pack it away? And I said, I missed it, I'm sorry. And so then the decision was, well, do we keep it or do we throw it out? Like, what's the thought? So I made the decision, let's keep it because there's nothing wrong with it. It's just aesthetically not as moist as what we would usually work with. So I'm working with this fish that's dry-skinned and feels far more fatty and rich than what it would usually be. And so I put it into the fry pan and the skin puffs off the fish, like pork crackling. A big bubble pops up and I'm looking at this thing like, this is unbelievable and this is the crunchiest skin I've ever cooked. The people eating it are like, wow, this is amazing. But I never told Stephen, like I never said, let's dry the fish skin now, like let's just do it like that. Again, I just wrote it in my book and moved on. And I just thought, well, it's almost like cheating. If you're starting with skin that's a little bit more dry, then you're putting it into a hot fry pan full of hot fat, then you're going to get a better outcome. You put a wet fish in a hot fry pan full of fat, it's likely going to stick. It makes more logical sense.
Like beef would if you did that with beef, right?
Or roast, like think about Peking duck. Like there's all this conditioning and planning and processing with regards to getting the skin dry so that when you put it in an oven, it goes crispy. And so if you were to give that duck a quick spritz with water just before it went into the oven, it wouldn't be as crisp. And so then come 2016, when Julie, my wife, and I opened St. Peter, there was very much this awareness that we're working with a highly fragile, highly laborious, expensive protein that is fish. And if I'm going to get my first invoice back from fish that says that I've just spent $5,000 to turn this restaurant on just with fish alone, it makes absolutely no sense to put $2,500 of this bill in the bin. And that's what we do on a daily basis in a Western kitchen. There's very little reverence towards, let's use the stomach, let's use the heart or the liver.
So we go to all the trouble of cutting out the fillet.
That's right.
And throwing the rest of the fish away.
That's right. We take our 15 by 6 centimetre rectangle out of the middle and then we move on. And yeah, sure, you can make some fish stock and you can do bits and pieces with the collars and things, but where's the luxury and where's the reverence within those parts that encourages the consumer to want to purchase it and see it as being as valuable as the fillet? Because inevitably the bone, the organs and all the bits and pieces, they're not cheaper than the rest of the fish. They carry the exact same monetary value. And so this is where it all started. The costs associated with the work we were doing didn't make sense until we started using more of the fish.
So when you say using more of the fish, you're talking a lot of the time about offal, fish offal. What kind of things have you found you can do with fish offal? Or is this something you've discovered or it's been done in cooking traditions from elsewhere?
I think firstly it is poignant to say that, culturally this has been done all over the world and for reasons born sheerly out of necessity, first and foremost. But then
all the best food comes from famine.
That's right.
Starvation. You're like, well, let's try this then, since we're all starving to death.
Even if you think about, caviar, it's born from fish offal, the eggs of a fish, basically, getting produced into something that's highly luxurious and beautiful. So for us, texturally, I suppose from a Western approach, from a boy from Maitland, I would never saddle up and celebrate the texture of eyes, or I would never saddle up to the fish sperm or shirako in Japan. Like those things carry such fishy connotations and softness and creaminess and all those things. So how is it that we can transform and modify these offal of a fish into something that we can feel nostalgically close to, which is then why we've interpreted many different parts of the fish in different ways. One of them being we make ice cream out of the vitreous humour from a fish eye. which is to basically replace the yolks taken from an egg from a chicken. And, you know, we've made foie gras using the liver of John Dory. We've gone and made pâtés, terrines, sausages,
yeah.
chorizos, and
so when you put these fish guts in a sausage, but that's a form most of us are familiar with and are pretty happy to eat a snack.
Absolutely. I mean, when people go up to Fish Butchery in Paddington or out at Waterloo and pick up their couple of fish sausages, it's far more aesthetically pleasing to interpret what that is as opposed to then what those products would be if they were sitting on a plate. So,
when we go to fish markets, we see fish lying on ice that often glistens with moisture. What's the mistake that's going on there?
Well, I mean, if we think about it from a scientific point of view, all fish have an organic compound in them called trimethylamine. And when a fish dies, it converts into trimethylamine oxide. And then upon poor management of that trimethylamine oxide and the conversion starting to happen where it starts to convert into ammonia, then that's what we refer to when we're talking about fishy fish. So when people come in and say, what's your least fishy fish? They're not referring necessarily to mackerel or bonito or things that have stereotypically been fishy. What they're talking about is, what's the one with the least amount of ammonia onset on it?
Hang on, are you saying to me that watery spray that's being sprayed, is that causing the fishy fish?
Well, think about it from this way. With osmosis, if you're putting fresh water onto a saltwater product, as the fresh water moves through the membrane of the saltwater product, it's trying to find an equilibrium, which is then basically making the salt product less salty. The cells are starting to fill with fresh water, and as they fill with fresh water, they get to a breaking point where they actually rupture, and then the fresh water then basically collapses the structure of the flesh of the fish, and then that residual moisture that's left within the fillet is then where bacteria is harboured and begins to grow. Think about it this way. If you go into a butchery and you look at, you know, a piece of beef, strip loin on the bench with bone in, and then we want a couple of sirloin steaks. We take the knife, we draw it along, we take the sirloin off, we dip it into a pool of water, we bring it onto the cutting board, we take a slice of sirloin, we dip it in water again, and then we go and we put it on ice. How long is it, do you think, until that meat goes rancid or slimy or sticky or begins to even have an odour? And then also, how is it then that you'll be able to take that wet piece of beef and put it onto a barbecue and achieve beautiful caramelisation and browning and all this sort of thing, when really, when you think about it, it's probably going to stick and you're going to need a good shovel to dig it up off the grill bars, which is, again...
And it's the same with fish?
This is what we have with fish, basically. And, you know, to my point around ammonia, the only way you mitigate ammonia is through the use of acidity, which is why we've got centuries of knowledge, especially from the French repertoire that suggests that we put a half a lemon with our fish, and why we have hollandaise sauce with our smoked salmon, and why we have tartare sauce with our fish and chips. They're all acidic garnishes getting ready for the imminence of odours
that have been caused to some degree by spraying water on them.
Correct.
In the shop.
To me, it's just foolish. It's dumb logic, basically, to suspend a fish in a state of mediocrity on ice and then every 20 minutes walk along and give it a quick spray so it all, like, magically looks as if it's just come out of the water again. Because when you get home and you unwrap your plastic and your paper and you smell that fish, it is going to smell like fish.
Sorry, just the whole idea that anxiety about that fishy smell is the very thing that's leading to practices that create that fishy smell.
Correct. So, like I said, like it's almost like if our car's dirty, we wash it. So if a fish has scales on it, like, think about the practice. We scale a fish, we wash it. We gut a fish, we wash it. We fillet a fish, we wash it. And then it goes on ice. And you take it home and expect to have some kind of amazing romantic time with this fish and have a good outcome. It's never going to be the case. And the best experiences we've ever had with fish usually happen on the back of the boat. When we've first caught the fish, we take a slice of it, we eat some sashimi or we grill it on the boat or do whatever we need to do, and it'll be removed of that fishy odour because nobody's had their hands on it. Nobody's ruined the beautiful state that it could have been in. So,
see, I'm only just now beginning to grasp the perversity with which we treat fish and cook fish in this country and elsewhere in the English-speaking world.
This isn't consistent only in a Sydney marketplace. This is global. Like, there is no fish market in the world that practices any kind of dry handling. Everything is done under running water.
Veteran Darwin restaurateur Jimmy Shu draws from a deep well of family food traditions. His father set up and ran the first Chinese restaurant in Colombo, in Sri Lanka, where Jimmy worked when he was a boy. Jimmy was our guest several times in the early years, and this is from 2018, when we sat down together in Darwin.
First of all, I've been eating something at your restaurant called stir-fried kangkong, which is a kind of a water spinach. Tell me how that's made, please.
First of all, you need a very, very hot fire. And it takes only about 15 seconds. So the main ingredient in that is the preserved yellow beans, the yellow soya beans, and then a bit of chili, maybe just one chili sliced diagonally, and some garlic. Now, the garlic, it doesn't have to be diced, just crushed with a heavy cleaver, and some hot oil, and you just throw the whole thing in there. A little bit of Maggie sauce if you wanted to, and that's it, really. Now, I fell in love with this dish when someone mentioned about this in Bangkok. One of my travels, they said, you should go and try the Pat Bung Loi Fa. Pat Bung is kangkong, Loi Fa is flying. I was thinking, what the hell is this flying kangkong is all about? Well, it's only about an hour and a half drive down south from Bangkok. You get to a place called Pattaya, and nearly every little corner there has got this flying kangkong. Okay, what's this flying kangkong? You order it on one side of the street, and the person who cooks it on the other side of the street. And your waiter who takes the order is beside you with a plate. And the moment this is cooked, and the guy the chef or the cook looks behind, takes aim, and he flings it over the road, the street, over buses, over cyclists. And of course, you got to be. I'm sure the guys who catch these kangkong will be make good cricketers. And lo and behold, bang! It's on your plate, and then it serves it up to you. And I thought, that's very fascinating. But I don't think I could duplicate that in my place. I'll need a carpet cleaner every day.
The next stories are from Maggie Beer. These days, Maggie's influence is so broad, she's virtually a culinary demigod. However, she's always declared herself to be a cook, not a chef, and stood firmly on the side of home cooking and the right of everyone to eat fresh, tasty food. When we spoke, Maggie talked about her early life and what happened when her father's pots and pans manufacturing enterprise went belly up. So you said after the factory failed, your mum and dad had to start again, sell the house. How did they reinvent themselves after this disaster?
Well, it probably took 18 months, perhaps 2 years. And mum and dad started catering at a golf club. By then, it was out near Auburn, out that way. And so first of all, a golf club and then an RSL club. And in fact, when Colin and I married, it was the Chester Hill RSL that we had our big wedding breakfast, as they call them, and a feast that it was. But they turned their love of food, their ability to work into a business to get them started again. And so much so they were able to buy a little house in Auburn, a little fibro house on a big plot of land, as suburban plots were then, and began again. But he was so far ahead of his time. Like, my dad used to hang fillets of beef in the cool room for ages, just like they do now.
And had food always been important, good food, been important in your family's life?
It was important for every memory I have of any celebration. It was a feast. Food was so important. It was not just the vegetables we grew. It was it was every part of an animal. Like, we would make brawn out of a pig's head. We had our uncle who had a farm at Castle Hill. He would grow some poultry and we would get geese from him. We would go dabbing for prawns in the harbour. We would have whole fish and oysters off the rocks. Everything was about beautiful food. Simple beautiful food.
So there was good food to be had in those days, and I suppose this is before the days of total mass manufactured food that appeared in supermarkets everywhere.
Look, it was good food, but it was very limited. Like in the greengrocer, you would have spinach, and you would have, at this time of year, you'd have turnips and swedes and parsnips and carrot and pumpkin, and you would have beans and peas. You know, it was very limited. There was no such thing as basil and zucchini and eggplant, but it was about freshness, and it was about, I think it was more about offal for animals. Offal is my favourite food.
Really?
Yes.
Why?
Well, because Dad loved it, and my first thing I ever cooked about the age of 7 were chicken livers, and I cooked livers on the stove, and I remember Dad saying, stop picking at that, there will be none left for the table. I love brains and sweetbreads. Tripe was the only thing that I couldn't bear. And I couldn't bear the smell. I have a very sensitive sense of smell. And Mum and Dad one day made me sit at the table from lunch till dinner until I ate it, and I still wouldn't do it.
There's the trauma. That's it there, I think. Tripe trauma. That's it.
But now I love it. I love
really?
it.
Right.
Yes.
Oh, well, that's good to know. So, like in those days, there wasn't any Maggie Beer fig and walnut ice cream in the freezer at the back of the supermarket. What was dessert like in those days?
Well, dessert was very rare for us. We used to have a lot of fruit, but dessert would be a bread and butter custard if it was a special treat. Well,
that's pretty nice. That's pretty nice. Bit of cinnamon on top, that sort of thing. Yeah.
And the little raisins would burn on the top, and I would love it when they were burnt. And just sometimes we'd have in the winter golden syrup dumplings. But yes, but that was the rarity. That was a special occasion.
Now it's another chef, so well loved, as to be known solely by her first name, Poh. Poh Ling Yeow's built a media career around her enthusiasm for food, culture and flavours. It's a vocation that might have been evident to her teachers in Kuala Lumpur, Malaysia, where she lived as a little girl. If only they paid attention.
What kind of a kid were you at school in those young years?
I was odd. I suffered hugely from separation anxiety. I went to convent Bukit Nanas. It was like in this big old convent. And I just remember not understanding anything and just spending a great deal of time daydreaming. That was kind of my specialty. I feel like I had some kind of learning difficulty that was undiagnosed. Because I was definitely creative from a young age. And, you know, Asian countries, I think it's safe to say that, it's safe to generalise that they're very much focused on academia. And so, I spent a great deal of it just thinking I was just not very smart. I used to spend a good deal of time sitting in the back row with my mate, doing that thing where you rub over coins and making fake money and then cutting up my graph paper into noodles and pretending I was running a hawker stall. And then getting my pencil shavings, and that was my little guitiao. That was my garnish. That was my fried shallots. And then I'd wrap it up and go, thank you. Whisper, do my little transaction.
Really?
Yeah.
But it wasn't too tasty though. It wasn't very flavoursome.
No.
Your first attempt.
Paper and pencil shavings. Isn't that funny how telling your little memories of yourself are early on in life?
Explain to me the joy of baking.
Richard, I love baking so much that my oven door actually fell off the other day. It's a really nice metaphor for my life because I never quite have a handle on life, and that's probably why I like to bake, because it calms me the hell down.
And then the oven door falls off, and they must induce a tiny bit of panic, I suppose.
Yeah. The other day I was like, oh my gosh, I really do bake a lot. I love it because I think it's for all the reasons that people don't like baking. It is a precise art, so you have to be, well, having said that, once you know what you're doing, you can actually
fiddle with the margins of it.
Yeah. You sort of learn the tolerances within a recipe, how you can push things around and, make it a little bit moist, adding a little bit of sour cream or, playing around with baking times, lowering the temperature. So I think the thing that I love about it so much is that you have to measure I find that all very calming and very comforting.
The preparation process.
It's just this kind of, it's more ritualized because it's like, you know what creaming the butter and the sugar is. And so I love that, unless you do something drastically wrong, the outcome is fairly predictable. And, but also the alchemy, I find it fascinating. And I love it so much. I'm very well known for parking myself in front of an oven and watching a cake rise like TV. I actually love it because I just love seeing where, the whole troubleshooting thing. I even love when things go wrong. I'm like, what have I done? So I learned that from my mum. So mum's a mad baker.
Right. So you put this thing in the oven that isn't very promising looking. This little lumps of something.
Yes.
And they come out. And it looks, it's transformed into this thing that smells really good and tastes really good.
Yeah. And people always love you when you're a baker.
They do?
Because you bring treats.
Yeah.
You always come with treats. But with baking, I think it's the alchemy. Like with such basic ingredients like, eggs, butter, flour, sugar, there's just an infinity of, variety you can get out of that, which I find magical. You feel like a magician.
Podcast. Broadcast and online. You're listening to Conversations.
You'll find links to the full interviews with all our featured guests in the show notes of this episode. This conversation was recorded on the lands of the Gadigal, Jagera and Turrbal peoples. Thanks to story producers Nicola Harrison and Pam O'Brien. Story editor was Michelle Ransom-Hughes. Executive producer of the Conversations 20th Anniversary Collection is Carmel Rooney. I'm Richard Fidler. Thanks for listening.